I'm Jenny, I'm an artist, an animal lover, and I'm the founder of Wildlife Drawing. This is the second in a series of drawing tutorial videos, and today is all about owls. During the course of this video, we're going to be meeting some magnificent owls, we're going to be learning all about them. Then we're going to be showing you a lovely montage of owls so you can pick your own reference image. Then you'll join me back in the studio and I'm going to be teaching you how to draw your owl step by step. So now let's go and meet some owls. So here today we're out in the lovely Kent countryside with Sky Birds of Prey. Ryan here is going to be telling us all about owls, and he's been working with birds of prey since he was 11 years old, so he's got plenty of facts for us. Ryan, who have we got here today?
This is Socks. Socks is a male Bengal eagle owl. He's about 5 years old and he's what we call hand-reared, meaning that he's a bird I've had since an egg, and he's been with me everywhere since pretty much. He's just had his winter break. He's coming back to do our experiences and all our shows again.
He is absolutely magnificent. The thing I'm drawn to most are those incredible orange eyes. Has he got really good eyesight?
He's got binocular vision.
Binocular vision.
Again, owls have different colour eyes. So you've got black eyes is nocturnal, you get yellow eyes is diurnal, hunter is daytime. And then you've got orange eyes, which is your best of both your dusk and dawn, your day and night hunters. Yeah. So he's a all-rounder bird basically.
And he's got these incredible talons as well. What kind of prey would he take in the wild?
So naturally these birds are from India, so these will be eating anything up to the size of rabbits, so small mammals and things like that. But they do take a lot of snakes and lizards in the wild. So the design of the talons are for catching and holding on to their prey.
And how about these little these feather tufts here? They're not ears, are they?
No, so not ears. So owls' ears are actually offset, so you have one up higher than the other. So these on his heads are what we call feather tufts. And they predominantly go by wind direction. So birds of prey and owls in general like to fly into the wind. Yeah. Secondly, it's all to do with making themselves look bigger and scarier.
Gotcha.
And then thirdly, could be for mating.
Oh, I see, I see. What I really want to know is, are owls as wise as everyone thinks they are?
So again, a bit of a myth in a way. So owls are, birds of prey are clever in a general way of the same routine in where they do things, but with these owls, their brains are very, very small, and they do things not as the brightest of ways.
Got it.
Everything's always hard way for them.
So they've got a good reputation, but it's not necessarily backed up.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
I see. So I'm seeing Socks here. He's turning his head almost all the way around. Can owls actually do that?
So no, not all the way. So all the way is obviously 360.
Yeah.
So these owls can turn their head around about 270, which is 3/4 of the way around. So they've got special vertebrae to allow that movement. Obviously with owls' eyes as well, owls' eyes are solidly fixed. They can't move him. So what he's doing now, he's bobbing his head side to side, and he's taking it all in. But it's 270 degrees, 3/4 of the way around they go.
Amazing. God, those eyes are incredible. And just lastly, I've got one of my favourite owl facts, which I know you know. It's about tawny owls.
Yeah.
Do you want to enlighten us?
So Jenny's favourite fact for these owls, obviously tawny owls. Tawny owls are a British bird of prey, and again, these owls do a lot of twit-twooing. Generally, a lot of people think it's just the one bird calling, but it's actually between them. One of them, the male, calling to the female. So one does a twit, one does a twoo.
I love that fact. So thank you so much to you, Ryan, to you, Socks. It's been incredible to learn about you. Thank you. So now you've met those three magnificent owls, it's time to choose your own reference image from the montage that's coming up next. So now hopefully you've found an owl that you'd like to draw. You can either press pause on the film, you can take a screenshot, or you can print it out. I find this a little bit easier. I've chosen to draw socks today because I felt like we had a connection, but also I love the amazing markings on his feathers. So today I'm going to be working with a variety of different pencils. I've gone for a B, a 2B, a 4B and a 6B. The B is the hardest, the 6B is the softest. I've also got an eraser, very useful. I'm going to be using that a lot, I think. And also a pencil sharpener. I like to keep my pencils nice and sharp to get all those lovely details of those lovely whiskery feathers. This is my drawing of socks that I made a little bit earlier. I used a variety of different pencil techniques in this drawing, and so today I'm going to be showing you not just about proportions, but also how to build up your shading and your mark making and to create a sort of really three-dimensional owl, so they might look like they're about to fly off the paper. So now, get all of your bits and bobs together and we'll get cracking. Okay, I'm going to start now by putting my one I made earlier out of the way. And when you're looking at your reference image of your owl, it's a really good idea to almost break the animal down into a series of really simple shapes and lines that you can kind of build up your owl again on the paper. I'm going to start with this, what I call a nice egg shape here. Okay, so the pointy bit is down here where the feather tips are, and the rounded bit is up here. Once I've got this egg shape on my paper, it means I've got a better idea of the composition, you know, so my owl head's not going to fall off the edge of the paper. Let's start with our nice rounded egg shape. Don't worry if this is not quite right. You can always rub it out if it's not exactly what you're after. I would say at this point it's good to keep your lines nice and light because of course we're going to be rubbing these sort of sketch marks out. The next shape we're going to be putting in is the shape for the head. And now I want you to look quite carefully at the head of your owl. Certainly Socks here, he's got a really square head, you know, it's not rounded, and he also doesn't have very much of a neck. Okay, we know his neck is there, it's underneath all the feathers, but there's no sort of curve for a neck. Sometimes when people do put necks on owls, they end up looking like penguins, which is not what we want today. So I'm going to start to bring up this line here and give him a little square on the top of his head there. And something that you can do is use your original shapes to measure your proportions. And so what I mean by that is, so we've drawn our egg shape here, okay? And so that sort of corresponds to this shape here. And if you measure, we've got our owl head here, and the owl head almost sort of divides into that egg shape twice, if you see what I mean. So we've got one head, the other head, and then that's the point at which our egg tip should stop. So we can double check that on our page here. We've got 1, 2, and that point is corresponding to the egg tip there. So we know that things are in a good place. So now we're going to start on the face. And the way I begin any face usually is to start with a face cross. So that's basically a horizontal line that goes over the eyes, and then a vertical line that comes down over the nose, or in our case, Socks' beak. And so what I'm going to do is just add a line here just to figure out where those eyes begin. And you want to make sure you make your lines correspond with the curve of the face. So we've got a slight bend there, and then we're going to bring a line down the middle here for the beak. Something a bit like that. So now you'll notice that our owls have got these incredible facial discs that frame the eyes. So the way to put those in is to use just 2 sort of semicircles to figure things out. So a semicircle here on the left side, and one here on the right. And to join up the two facial discs, we've got an amazing forehead here, which connects up to those feather tufts, which are not ears. So you can add that little sort of, I'm not sure what this shape is called, this sort of rectangular section here that's leading down to the beak. And then this is our feather tufts here. So of course I understand that you might not be drawing socks, and so I wanted to just point out that on some of the other owls the facial disc structure might be a little bit different, but there will always be this incredible sort of semicircle that you can follow here. So do pay attention. Not all of the structures of the faces are the same, but they will always have this really defined roundness, and the eyes will be set right in the middle. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is put in the eyes. And a lot of people tend to give owls really big, round, googly eyes. And they are big and round, but I think the key is to always add in the owl's eyelid as well. So you can see it's not a full circle here. It's actually sort of bisected by that lid that's coming down. So when we put our owl eyes in, we're positioning them in the center of those facial discs there. And we're going to be using that brow line that we originally put in from the face cross. Make sure you leave enough space in between the two eyes. The next thing we're going to tackle is the beak. We all know that owls' beaks are actually curved, but that's only when you're viewing them from the side. When you're viewing them straight on, they actually look a little bit more like a diamond shape. So just pay attention to the angle of your beak. So we're going to start to put our beak in here, and we're using that vertical face cross line to just make sure it's right in the center of the face. And make sure it's nice and pointy at the end. Mine might need to be a little bit longer there, I think. And something else that's really important is we need to make the beak look like it belongs to the face. And owls always have these amazing sort of little hairs on their face. I call them their moustache feathers. And so you want to kind of add those on top of the beak to make it look, like it belongs to the face. Okay then, now the face is looking a bit more owl-like, we can start to look at the rest of the body. And within this initial egg shape that you drew, we want to pick out the shape of this wing. And so have a look carefully at the way that your wing is folded and fits into the rest of the body. So Socks's wing here is he's sort of hunched up on this side, and then that's got a really amazing straight line that's coming right out like this, and all of this amazing, these layers of feathers. And so don't worry if your wing tips are coming out of that initial egg shape. It doesn't all have to fit in to that area. So now we've got our wing, we can start to look at the different feathers around the body. And so the breast feathers are nice and soft and fluffy, so we can sort of give that a little bit more texture. And then certainly down here, nice and fluffy around the feet. But then as we get to the very end, we can see the tail feathers were a little bit more structured. And so we can bring those down. Just make sure we know where they're going to be. Something a bit like that. And then the feet. Because Socks is so fluffy, we can't see a great deal of his legs, but it is a really good idea to understand and really think about the joint structure that's underneath. So, as we might have seen in the film earlier, the leg joints of the owl actually come down here, and that's their sort of backwards knee is at this point, and then the legs extend out. So have a little look at the angle at which the leg meets the body, and make sure your owl looks like, you know, their point of gravity is right. They're not about to topple over. So when you're drawing your feet, you can get those amazing talons in. You can just draw them very, very lightly at the moment. We're going to go back and add detail. Just marking out where everything is at the moment. And you can also make a little mark. So you might be drawing the barn owl on its perch, or you might be drawing Socks here on the glove, but just give a little nod to what they're standing on so they're not floating in midair. Now at this point you should have a fairly decent plan of your owl, but there are a few ways that you can sort of just cross-check that everything is in the right place. And if you watched the previous video, you might remember the line method. So the line method is basically when you're looking at your reference image, you can draw an imaginary line from a point on the reference image to another point and just make sure it lines up in the same places on your drawing. So what I can do here is I'm going to look at the right side of Socks' head, and I'm going to draw that imaginary line down and see that it meets just in the middle of the legs there, so I can make sure that's the same with my drawing. Yeah, it's not bad. I think I might need to bring this leg out here. So it is just a really good way to make sure everything is in the right place. And the same here. So if we draw a line horizontally from the edge of his left side, meets the beak, and it meets partway down the wing. Beak, partway down the wing. Might need to make my beak a little bit longer. So I'm going to select a much softer pencil to start my shading. I've gone for a 4B. And I always find it really useful before you start shading to have a really good look at your owl first, and just try and have a little look where the light is coming from. So Socks here was outside. Naturally the light from the sun was coming from above, but he is pretty well lit, but there's some nice areas of shadow here underneath the wing, and certainly kind of on his underside and around his feet and on his tail feathers, so we can understand that's where the sort of the darkest parts will be in terms of shadow. But also he's got these incredible markings, so we want to have a range of tones for those markings, and he's got some really sort of dark brown feathers here on his wings, and of course those piercing black pupils. So what I find useful is to start by putting a little bit of a tonal scale on my paper. So I'm pressing on the hardest that I possibly can to create the darkest tone with my pencil, and then what I'm going to do is just get a little lighter each time. So I'm adjusting the pressure that I'm using with the pencil and getting different greys. So now I'm sort of coming down all the way through the mid-tones. Now I'm just very lightly pressing on. I've got a really nice pale grey, barely there, and then the white of the paper is also a part of that palette. So you want to use all of those tones, and I think when you do, your drawing will be dramatic, and it'll show confidence, and it'll really make people want to look at it. And what you can do is correspond those tones, those pressures with the different parts of your owl. So here, the darkest tone will obviously be applied to those areas that we discussed, the beak, the eyes, parts of the wing. And then, so say here, the lightest tones and the white of the paper will be the areas that you leave white. So things here on the breast feathers, certainly a lot around the face. You can see a little bit here on the one I made earlier. I've left quite a lot of this sort of section white here, and I think the two, sort of the area of white next to that amazing dark wing, looks really exciting. So I'm going to start to shade in the areas that are darkest around the face. And something that I do is I use my pencil always in the same direction as the feathers are going. So you're not just showing tone, but you're also adding to the overall shape of the face. And I would never usually begin with a really important part of the owl, so I wouldn't necessarily go straight in for the eyes. Sometimes I need to kind of get warmed up a little bit with the tone before I do the important parts of the of the drawing. So when you're beginning your shading, you can have fun with these marks and play around with it a little bit. What I like to do is use my pencil marks to emulate the feathers. So for example, where the feathers are broader and softer and longer, I'll use long, kind of nice marks to show that sort of fluffiness. But in areas where the owl has got more rigid feathers, for example on the wing, or where the facial discs are defined, that's where I use sort of shorter, harder marks. Just try to be a little bit intuitive, I suppose. And you can start to see it take shape now, which is quite exciting. Something that is quite a good idea is, if you're right-handed like me, start on the left side and work this way. Of course, if you're left-handed, maybe do the other side. Now we're going to look at putting the all-important eyes in. And so we've marked out the area where our eyes need to be. Remember that all-important lid coming over the eyes. You can start to define that space a little bit more. And on the other side here too. Just make sure your eyes are lined up. One's not huge and one's not small. I often think it's easier to start with the lid first, and then we can get that shape underneath. Have a think about the eyes as full circles, and then look at the amount of circle that's been shaved off the top. Again, going back to those simple shapes. Yeah, something a bit like that. And when you put your pupils in, again, remember that you're not going to see the full pupil of the owl. It's got that lid coming over. But what we will do is add our all-important circle of white into the pupils to show a reflection. And I don't know what it is, it just is a handy technique that makes, if you're drawing anything with an eye, just makes it look more alive. Something a bit like that, and then make sure you've got, understand that the pupils will be in slightly different areas of the eye, depending on the angle of your owl. Do always take a step back and make sure they look right, because what we don't want is a cross-eyed owl. Okay, if you're happy with the positions of your pupils, you can start to add a little bit more tone. And your owl should miraculously come to life. And now I always think, like with the beak, you want to make sure the eyes look like they belong to the owl's face. So pay attention to the really fine feathers all around the eyes. And what you can do again is use your, do you know what, I'd even maybe sharpen your pencil at this point. Or use a harder pencil. And start to add in some of the really fine feathers around the eye. Because the eyes are actually quite deep set in the face, so there will naturally be some little shadow in them, like that. And then of course you've got those amazing feathers that are coming down over the beak that are joined up. Okay then, with the beak. Now, I always think if you get the beak right, you get the bird right. And beaks are notoriously difficult to get right. So pay real attention to the amount of curve that's in the beak. Maybe there's not very much. And the length as well. So what I'm going to do is start to define my beak a little bit more. And actually, I don't think it's curved as much as I've sketched it out. So I'm going to amend it slightly. But I think what's really key with any bird of prey is that pointiness. So make sure your beak is nice. I've got a lovely fine point on the end. Because the beak is made of a shiny material, I think keratin, but you'll be able to see a reflection coming off the beak. So make sure you adhere to that when you're shading. You also might see a few little nostrils poking in. You can add them in. And then sometimes what's really useful is if you're trying to show white feathers coming over a dark surface, you can almost work backwards. So you're sort of creating your feathers with the pencil marks that you're making for the beak. A little bit like that. Even a little bit more pointy, I think. That's better. Great. And now we can really start to build up all these moustache feathers. But don't go too wild around this area because it's still a very light area by comparison to the rest of the owl. Okay, then, so we've got quite a lot of the fine detail around the face, and I'm fairly happy with how it's looking. Now what we can do is have a little bit more fun with our mark making. So here you can take a much softer pencil and you can start to be a little bit more, I guess, gestural with your marks for your feathers. And so I often like to have a little bit of fun with it. Sometimes I like to use my pencil on the side and get some nice, interesting marks coming down. Again, always using my pencil in the same direction as the feathers are flowing. Or you can see here the pattern on the feathers is quite interesting as well. So you can start to play around and build up, you know, a lovely sort of feathery texture with the way you're working here. And really, this is the point where you can start to, you know, explore your own style a little bit. Don't worry if what you create is not exactly what you had in mind. I think drawing is all about experimentation, and also, you know, if you're not super happy with your owl at the end of this drawing class, you could do another one. But also, nothing bad is ever going to happen. You know, I think being creative is about taking risks sometimes, and you know, creativity is a journey. So here I'm just sort of building up the layers of feathers that I can see in the wings, and I'm not being as precise around the face. I'm not being as precise as I was around the face. I think sometimes drawings are quite magical when a lot of detail is captured in one area and then the rest of the drawing is a little bit more sketchy and a little bit more free. But of course, it's your personal preference. And you can see there are areas where the feathers are parting, and so at this point do make sure you know which bits that you would like to relieve as your white highlight. Just pay really close attention to the different tones on the feathers. And Socks has got some pretty incredible markings going on here, really quite complicated. And you absolutely don't have to draw every single feather. That would take you 1,000 years. You can just apply your marks to the areas that are most sort of densely populated, if you like. It's sort of a mixture of marks and a bit of shading that will create that three-dimensional effect. But also, you know, when people look at your drawing, they will understand that it's a fully feathered owl. If you do leave areas that don't have any feathers in, people will know that that's not a bald patch. If you've got a big area that you want to colour in, shall we say, Again, you can use that technique where you're using your pencil on the side to just really add an area of tone quite quickly. I've gone for quite a soft pencil at this point as well, and it just means that it saves you a little bit of time. You can also work over this. It's almost like a base coat, if you like. You can always add detail and texture over the top, but it's just a really nice way to sort of, get that three-dimensionality down quickly. And by using a sharp or a harder pencil, you can start to define a little bit more of the sort of feather tips, if you like. What you need to understand is the way that the feathers lay over each other. It's almost like a sort of like a tiling effect. And the way you can do that is just by drawing the edges of the feathers as they lay over each other, something a bit like this. You don't need to draw every single feather, but just to give a hint to, how the feathers are laying is quite good. This shading and building up of your texture, it might take you a little bit of time. It's a bit of a labour of love, to be honest, but I think at this point, if you're quite happy with your proportions, you can kind of get lost in your shading. You could pour yourself a cup of tea or a glass of wine if you fancy, put the radio on or a podcast and just sort of relax for a little bit. Because they say that when you draw, you access the same part of your brain as you do when you're meditating. That sort of focus on the thing that's in front of you, it sort of clears the mind and is a very calming effect. And I think especially when you're drawing something as beautiful as Socks the Owl. So we've found ourselves down by the feet again. So we should pay a little bit of attention to those feet. And Socks's feet here are nice and furry, but they've got those incredible talons coming out. And so what you'll want to do is just have a real think about how those toes are coming out from the feet. And I sometimes find it a little bit easier to draw the toe of the owl first and then add the talon in afterwards. It just makes sure the talon looks like it belongs to the toe. And so I'll just bring a sort of curved line up over here and then create that sort of soft fleshy bit right at the very end of the toe, a bit like this. And then just really, again, pay attention to that curve. It's pretty long. These talons, they can take some pretty decent prey, can these owls? So something a little bit like that. And then depending on the angle of your toe will mean the different shape of your talon. So again, this Socks's talon here is sort of laying flat. So we're still going to have that fleshy end of the toe there, but then the talon itself will be a very different shape. So just really pay attention when you do this bit. And always check back just to make sure they look right. Not too bad. And of course you can go in with your fine, sharp pencil and get all that lovely fluff on the feet. And naturally, because the feet are underneath the body, you can add a little bit more shading around them and sort of in between the legs. And that, when you shade anything in the background, it makes the foreground next to it pop out. So that's quite a good technique for getting that lovely three-dimensional effect. A bit like that. Of course, if you were drawing the barn owl, you can actually see a lot more in the way of their legs. So you won't necessarily have as much kind of fluff to contend with, but again, you can use that technique to get those legs to pop out by shading the underside of the tail feather a bit like that. And then at this point, we did say we don't want our owls to be floating in midair, so do just allude to the fact that they are, well, socks here is on a glove, so what you can do is just draw a couple of lines to show that that's where he's standing. But then you don't need to make it too detailed unless you want to, but then usually what I would do is just again use that side of the pencil just to give a little shadow. Just adds a sense of gravity. Something a bit like that. Now I'm going to really go to town with the side of my pencil, and I'll be a little bit more, I don't know, experimental in my mark making. So what I want to do is sort of capture all of this sort of lovely mottled effect on the wing. And if I show you here on my one I made earlier, I have defined the feather tips here, but generally what I've done is been quite, I don't know, just had a little bit of fun with it really. So this is what I'm going to do now. And I'm sort of just trying to, I'm keeping referring to the reference image. I want to make sure that all of the dark patches are in the right places. But I'm also trying to get that sort of lovely pattern on the feathers. And I'm not afraid to sort of press down hard and get that sense of drama and confidence. Again, if you're not happy with how it's working, you can always rub it out. It's a nice opportunity to just explore your style a little bit and see what the pencils are capable of, you know. And some of the feathers are a bit stripy, so you can add a couple of fun little stripes here and there if you like. Just be careful if you have shaded in a big area, your hand's probably going to smudge it, but don't worry, you can always work that out with the eraser again at the end. It's easy at this point to lose yourself in the process, but my advice would be to always take regular steps back and just make sure you're not overworking your drawing, because it is really easily done. Now as we get down here onto the tail feathers, you can see just how the light is catching the edge of these feathers here. And so we're going to use that shading behind technique. We're just going to add a sort of blanket bit of tone behind here. And then what we can do is use the fine tip of the pencil just to define the edges of the feathers there. And again, have a look at how they're laying over each other. Have a look at the shape of the feather tip. Just make sure they're all looking like feathers. Looking at the angle as well that they're coming out of the body. Doesn't need to be an exact science, I think, at this point. You've got a lot going on your drawing. There's areas that can be less detailed, and that's fine. So you've got a bit of definition there. You can see that Socks has got that incredible sort of those wibbly stripes. So you can again use your pencil on its side, add some fun wibbly stripes. Again, no one's going to be cross-checking your drawing with your reference image. So if it is a little bit different, if you use a bit of artistic license, that's fine. That's the fun bit. And again, you can start to sort of work back in sort of the opposite way to show the sort of frayed edges of the breast feathers that are coming down here. So as you're starting to get to the end, you might find there are some areas that you want to tighten up a little bit. And for that, I like to take a slightly harder pencil and just define my outlines a little bit more, define the wing edges. If you just take a once over of your drawing and just make sure everything is looking nice and tight and defined, and it's quite satisfying, this bit. Same here on the wing. If you're like me, you've been smudging wildly, you can always take your eraser to that and sort it out at the very end. Just get those wingtips looking nice and tight. Okay. I think I'm done. I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to overwork it. So at this point you can take your rubber and you can just get rid of all that smudginess if you want to. Leave it in if you like. It shows all the hard work that you've done. And then at the very end, you should maybe label it. We've got Socks. He's a Bengal eagle owl. And then, of course, sign your artwork. Always. And there you go. A lovely, relaxing session, and hopefully a nice owl drawing at the end of it. Oh, thank you so much for drawing with me today. I hope you're feeling nice and relaxed. I'd absolutely love to see any of the owl artworks that you've created, and if you wanted to share them on social media and tag us, the information is at the end of the video. And I'll see you next time.